GamingBolt presents 15 video games with the greatest and creepiest hidden lore. It's unfair how often people don't realize the value of rich, well-written lore in video games. Such lore can give greater context to the world, texture to the stories and characters, lend you a deeper understanding of everything that's going on in the game, and as a result, immerse you into the entire experience more than you could have possibly imagined. But not all of the best lore is easy to find. Sometimes the developers hide these tidbits in the deepest, darkest corners of their games, or reveal them but oh so subtly. Here in this feature, we're going to take a look at 15 of the best and or creepiest pieces of hidden lore we've come across in games. If there's anything you feel like we have missed, let us know in the comment section below. Warning, spoilers ahead. Bloodborne, The Great Ones. Given its reliance on and excellent usage of environmental and contextual storytelling, almost all of Bloodborne and all of the other Souls games belong on this list. But there's one piece of information about the mythical and terrifying Great Ones that will send chills up your spine. As per the lore of Bloodborne, every once in a while during the Red Moon, the Great Ones descend to Earth and place their children inside the wombs of humans who will willingly give themselves up for their purpose. This happens because the Great Ones cannot have children themselves, and because the humans participating in this ritual believe they're ascending to join them. The Last of Us, The Infected. The Last of Us should have been a typical generic game on paper with all of the trappings of a post-apocalyptic adventure, from a gruff, hardened male protagonist to the very existence of zombies within its world. However, it tweaked things every once in a while to give everything a unique twist, a distinct flavor. Take the zombies themselves, for instance. While in almost every other zombie-related story, the mindless freaks roaming and drooling about are strictly known to be nothing but corpses who can somehow move around. The infected in The Last of Us are not dead people. These beings are very much alive, and the person they once were continues to exist within them forever. Sure, they're always fighting against the infection, and with time, the infection keeps on growing, to the point where the person becomes nothing but a tiny speck in a corner of their own selves. But that person is still alive, giving you a whole new perspective about shooting these not-so-dead freaks. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, The Skull Kid. Majora's Mask, it seems, was almost entirely built around the concept of, let's put some really messed up shit in here. From the creepy moon to the happy masked salesman, there was something around every corner in this game that put the player on edge. Another such element was a character you're definitely familiar with if you've played the game, Skull Kid. This bit of lore about Skull Kid isn't exactly as hidden as some of the others in this list, but it lends so much depth to him as a character, as a villain. Basically, the four giants, who Link has to enlist to help him stop the moon from crashing into Termina, were once friends with the Skull Kid a long time ago. But after they had to return to their duties as the guardians of the world, the Skull Kid resented them for leaving, which is what basically lends to his errant behavior. Portal, GLaDOS. Portal's GLaDOS has to be one of the best written and most beloved characters in a video game in the last decade or so. Her cruelty and incessant mercilessness are as scary as they are funny, but there's actually a bit of tragic backstory to this murderous robot. GLaDOS was actually once the assistant of Cave Johnson, who was once the boss of Aperture Science, but after unchecked growth and immortal experiments led to a manic Johnson putting his assistant's consciousness into a robot, thus creating GLaDOS, she actually ended up destroying the facility. Undertale, Neutral Ending. Undertale's bad ending and happy ending are both, for different reasons, equally extreme in how they handle things, with one being excessively bleak and the other's propensity to tie things off oh so perfectly, seeming almost disingenuous, and yet still so rewarding. However, the neutral ending is perhaps the most hard-hitting one, because while it's not all bleak, it does tell you about the bad things that have happened, and then makes you live with them. The underground loses its leader, the burden of building a society only rests with a numbered few, and most of the other souls never even make it back. Pokemon Sun and Moon, Mimikyu. Pokédex entries in the Pokemon games have long been a means for Game Freak to include some really messed up stuff in their games without ever actually having to shove it down the player's throat. And while there are a great deal of Pokédex entries we could be talking about here, the one that concerns us right now is that of Mimikyu. Mimikyu is basically a ghost of a dead Pokemon, but anyone who sees its true face dies instantly. In order to receive adoration and love from trainers and people, Mimikyu wears the mask of a Pikachu it once found in the garbage as a twisted cry for attention and love. It's creepy and heartbreaking all at the same time, and it simultaneously makes Mimikyu one of the saddest and most interesting Pokemon ever. Mass Effect 2: Shepard's Helmet. BioWare's space opera epic, Mass Effect is brimming with incredibly rich lore that you can get lost in for hours on end if you're into that kind of thing. But for this feature, we're taking a look at something very specific. Players in Mass Effect 2 can actually find a battered and old helmet on the planet Altera that looks an awful lot like Shepard's N7 helmet from before the Normandy is destroyed at the beginning of the game. This of course leads to the question, where are the other bits of his armor? They were, of course, never recovered, which in turn leads us to question just how damaged Shepard's body must have been before Project Lazarus brought him back. We know the Elusive Man in Cerberus has deep pockets, but they obviously spent multiple fortunes on bringing the commander back from the dead. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, Arbiter's Grounds. Anyone who's played Twilight Princess probably has a very vivid memory of Arbiter's Grounds, one of the best dungeons in the game, at least from an atmospheric perspective. The Arbiter's Grounds were filled with quicksand flowing into gaping holes, torture devices, spikes, and booby traps, all of which were littered all over the place. But here's the thing, this place actually once served as a prison that housed some of Hyrule's worst undesirables, the Interlopers, or as they go on to be known, the Twilight. The implication that the interlopers were not only held captive in this twisted prison, but also tortured here with all of these devices and mechanisms is gnarly and grisly. Silent Hill 2: The Enemies. Silent Hill 2, just like all other games in this series, is brimming with terrifying enemies, from the bosses to the twisted and eerie pyramid heads. But the truth behind these enemies in the game is actually even more sinister. The enemies you encounter as James throughout the game are actually manifestations of his own psyche, since, without spoiling too much, he's not exactly the swell person you might initially believe him to be. The twisted and terrifying monsters you encounter are visual manifestations of his own inner demons, something he uses to torture and punish himself. Yeah, creepy to say the least. Luigis Mansion, Chauncey. Luigi's Mansion was set in a haunted house and was a game about running away from ghosts and sucking them into a vacuum cleaner, but it was by no means a horror game. However, one bit of information that the game presents that most people somehow choose to ignore is actually quite dark in its implications. Chauncey, the first boss you encounter in the game, is actually a baby, and of course, he's a ghost. It doesn't take a genius to put two and two together to figure out that Chauncey is a tortured spirit of a dead infant. What's even worse is that you, as Luigi, go on to beat up the ghost of this dead baby. Batman Arkham City, Harley Quinn. This particular bit of background storytelling isn't exactly front and center in Batman Arkham City, but a surprising number of people already knew about this. At one particular point early on in the game, Batman literally throws Harley Quinn to the ground where she falls on her stomach. By all means, this should be completely unimportant, but later on in the game, keen-eyed players will be able to find a crib with a baby doll inside it, dressed like the Joker, as well as dozens of pregnancy tests strewn about which are now reflecting negative. So does Batman unintentionally kill Harley Quinn's unborn baby? It's not completely outside of the realm of possibility, that's for sure. Metal Gear Solid 3: The Boss and the Sorrow. The Metal Gear series is perhaps one of those franchises that has a bit too much lore. It's hard to keep track of all of it at times, but there's no denying that some of it is absolutely excellent. Take the Boss and the Sorrow, the two members of the Cobra unit. It's a pretty well-known fact that the two of them were once in love. But do you know that Ocelot is actually their child? He was conceived on a battlefield, and after he was born, he was taken away by the Philosophers, who were essentially the precursors to the Patriots. It's a bit of information that the series doesn't even explicitly spell out, but if you look just a little harder, it's not hard to piece it together. Super Mario Galaxy 2: Shadow People. Creepy lore in a Super Mario game? Why, yes. Now, there's a very real chance that it's not creepy lore at all, just some beta files having somehow remained in the final game, or just background images that mean nothing at all. After all, people do have a habit of blowing things out of proportion, especially when it comes to story-related things in Nintendo games. Looking at you, Zelda Timeline fanatics. But whatever this is, it's interesting. At the beginning of the Shiver-Burn Galaxy in Super Mario Galaxy 2, you can actually spot some shadowy figures standing in the background a long distance away, and zooming in on these images shows them to be creepy shadow people. Perhaps they're just aliens who are watching Mario's progress, but they sure don't look friendly. Metal Gear Solid 5: Paz. The Phantom Pain left so many things unfinished, but credit has to be given where it's due. It handled some stuff rather well from a narrative perspective. The send-off to Paz's character in Ground Zeroes was abrupt and disheartening, and the fact that the fallout to this was delegated to secondary collection objectives in the game was a bummer for sure. But once you do end up collecting all of the mementos, you get a nice little payoff. Venom Snake has a hallucination of Paz, with the character appearing one last time as a phantom, a visual representation of Venom Snake's guilt over not having been able to save her, or his grief of losing her. World of Warcraft, Karazhan Crypts. The Karazhan Crypts have to be among the creepiest places in all of World of Warcraft. Not many players have entered it, but it's still well known among fans of the game. If you look at its interiors, the names of its various rooms, and piece together all of the excellent environmental storytelling at work, you can put together that this place was sort of like a twisted death sentence prison where criminals were sent to. There are bodies hanging upside down, scratch marks on the ground leading to a giant hole, which in turn falls straight into a pit of scattered human remains. It's a creepy place, which befittingly has some truly eerie art design and music to go along with it, and it undoubtedly deserves a place on this list. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.